The Topkapi Palace in Istanbul stood as the heart of the Ottoman Empire, dazzling visitors with gold ceilings, marble courtyards, and fountains that whispered luxury. To the outside world, the harem was seen as a place of beauty, a paradise where women were pampered, dressed in silks and surrounded by music and perfumes. But behind those decorated walls existed doors that few dared to name, let alone open. These were not the gilded chambers where the sultan entertained his favorites, but the darker passages, the forbidden rooms where young slave girls were broken into silence. Every year, hundreds of girls were brought into the palace, many captured during wars or purchased from slave markets stretching from the Caucasus to North Africa. Their journey ended in Istanbul, where they were stripped not only of their names, but of their identities. Inside the harem, they were no longer daughters or sisters. They were property. The palace architects designed the harem like a maze. Behind the great courtyards and chambers of the sultan's favorites, narrow corridors led to hidden doors. It was whispered among servants that beyond those doors lay the training halls. Here, the newly arrived girls were locked away, sometimes for weeks. Guards, eunuchs, and mistresses of the harem dictated what happened inside. The girls were taught how to walk, how to bow, how to speak, or more importantly, how to remain silent. What sounded like simple etiquette was anything but. The training broke their will. Mistakes were punished harshly. Hours of kneeling on cold stone floors. Days without food or lashings that left scars hidden beneath their silk robes. In these rooms, fear was the first lesson. It was not enough to obey. They had to surrender completely. Some girls resisted, clinging to memories of family and freedom. But resistance came at a cost. There are records, buried deep in Ottoman chronicles, of girls who vanished after disobeying the mistresses or offending the eunuchs. Their names never appeared again. For those who survived the training, survival meant silence, never questioning, never refusing, never speaking of the forbidden rooms. The most chilling detail was that even other women in the harem avoided talking about these chambers. The sultan's favorites, the concubines who rose in power, pretended the rooms did not exist. To admit their presence was to break the fragile illusion of paradise. Yet every girl who had passed through them carried invisible scars. From the outside, the Topkapi harem appeared to be a world of jewels and silks. But behind one locked door, a different reality unfolded. One built on fear, cruelty, and silence. The world never saw what truly happened inside. And that is where the darkest secrets of the Ottoman Empire began. The journey of a slave girl into the Ottoman harem began long before the palace gates. Many were captured during military campaigns ripped from villages across Eastern Europe, the Caucasus, and the Mediterranean. Others were purchased from bustling slave markets in Constantinople, Cairo, or Damascus. For merchants, these girls were not human beings. They were commodities, priced by their youth, their beauty, and their obedience. The Ottomans preferred certain regions. Circassian and Georgian girls with their pale skin and light eyes were prized above all. While African girls were often brought for service and labor inside the harem, the empire's reach was vast. And so the harem reflected the spoils of conquest. A collection of human lives gathered from lands thousands of miles apart. When a girl was chosen, she rarely knew her fate. Some were told they were going to serve in noble houses. Others were deceived with promises of marriage or wealth. But the truth revealed itself quickly when they arrived at the palace gates, stripped of their clothes, jewelry, and names. They were given new garments, plain, shapeless robes, that marked them as newcomers. From that moment, they were no longer themselves. They belonged to the sultan. The first stop was not the luxurious courtyards the world imagines, but the chambers hidden at the edges of the harem. Here they underwent inspections. Older women, known as mistresses of the house, examined them harshly. Their teeth, skin, and hair were checked as if they were livestock. A girl who did not meet the standards could be discarded, sent away to lesser households, or simply vanish. For those who passed, a new nightmare began. Training was immediate. They were taught to bow correctly, to avoid eye contact with eunuchs, and to move gracefully without ever appearing clumsy. Their voices were softened, their accents polished. They learned how to sing, to dance, and even to read the Quran. But the purpose was never education. It was control. The palace wanted to reshape them into creatures of obedience, shadows molded to fit a ruler's pleasure. Not all could endure. Some broke down quickly, refusing food or crying through the nights. Their punishment was swift. Isolation, beatings, or long hours of forced labor would follow. The mistresses often reminded them, "Here, the Sultan is your father, your world, your God." Any thought of family or freedom was to be erased. For the Sultan, the harem was both a private sanctuary and a political tool. The girls who survived the early days of training might one day rise in rank, becoming favorites or even mothers to princes. But before that, every single one passed through the forbidden rooms. And for many, the scars of those first weeks never faded. The palace shone like a jewel from the outside, but inside its gates, girls were stripped, inspected, renamed, and reshaped. Each step of their journey was carefully designed to break them, until only silence remained. The forbidden rooms of Topkapi were not spoken of openly, yet every girl knew their weight. They were the chambers hidden beyond the main courtyards, where windows were small and barred, and where the sound of laughter from the Sultan's favorites never reached. These were the places where innocence was crushed, and where a girl's will was tested until it broke. The first lesson inside was obedience. Girls were forced to repeat rituals endlessly, bowing, kneeling, reciting prayers, and carrying themselves in silence. Even the smallest mistake, a glance held too long, a stumble on the marble floor, brought punishment. They might be forced to kneel for hours until their legs gave way, or locked in a cold cell with no food or water for days. The mistresses believed pain was a teacher and fear was the only path to loyalty. But obedience was not enough. The harem demanded transformation. The girls were taught to walk with slow grace, to smile on command, and to sing even when their hearts ached. They practiced serving wine, arranging silks, and speaking in delicate tones. Behind these lessons lay something darker, the complete erasure of the person they once were. Every memory of family, every shred of identity had to be buried. The forbidden rooms made sure of it. One of the cruelest methods was isolation. Girl who resisted was locked alone in a chamber, stripped of light and sound. Days would pass with only a bowl of water pushed through the door. When she was finally released, she would stumble, broken and desperate, into the arms of her trainers, ready to obey just to avoid being shut away again. The eunuchs, who served as guards, played a key role, castrated to prevent them from threatening the Sultan's power. They enforced the silence of the rooms with ruthless discipline. Some were loyal to the Sultan, others to the mistresses, but all understood that their authority depended on control. To them, a crying girl was not a victim, but a problem to be solved through punishment. Whispers tell of girls who vanished entirely within these walls. Perhaps they died of illness. Perhaps they resisted too strongly. Official records do not mention them, but the silence of history speaks louder than words. For every favorite who rose to the Sultan's side, dozens of forgotten souls never emerged from the rooms at all, and yet the palace polished its image carefully. To visitors, the harem was described as a place of education, refinement, and honor. Foreign ambassadors wrote of silk-clad women and music-filled nights. None were allowed near the forbidden chambers. What the world saw was paradise. What the girls lived was prison. Every survivor of those rooms carried invisible wounds. Some learned to hide them beneath jewels and perfumes. Others never recovered. But for the Sultan's empire, the system worked. Silence, fear, and beauty woven together, all born from the darkness of the forbidden rooms. The harem's order depended on two forces, the eunuchs and the mistress of the harem, known as the valid Yusta. Together, they ensured the Sultan's will was obeyed, and that the forbidden rooms remained places of fear and silence. The eunuchs were the most feared. Brought from Africa, Eastern Europe, and the Middle East, they had been castrated as boys, often in brutal conditions that left many dead before reaching adulthood. Those who survived were sold into palace service. Their condition made them safe in the eyes of the empire. Unable to father children, they posed no threat to the Sultan's bloodline. But what they lacked in family ties, they made up for in absolute loyalty and ruthlessness. Inside the harem, there were the guards, the jailers, the silent watchers. They controlled every door, every corridor. A girl could not eat, sleep, or breathe without their permission. Their black robes and stern faces became symbols of fear. A whispered word from a eunuch could decide whether a girl advanced toward favor or was condemned to the shadows. They patrolled the forbidden rooms, enforcing punishments and dragging away those who disobeyed. Above them stood the mistress of the harem. Often an older woman who had once served as a concubine, she wielded immense power. She trained the newcomers, oversaw their behavior, reported directly to the sultan's mother, the valid sultan, the most powerful woman in the empire. The mistress of the harem was both teacher and executioner. She could reward obedience with silk robes or punish defiance with the whip. To the girls, she was the face of survival, feared, hated, and sometimes admired. Together, eunuchs and mistresses created an unbreakable system. The eunuchs controlled the body, while the mistresses controlled the mind. The girls quickly learned that every smile, every word, every movement was being watched. A misplaced glance or whispered complaint could be reported, leading to punishment. Trust was impossible. Even friendships were dangerous, because betrayal often bought protection. Some eunuchs developed cruel reputations, remembered in whispers as torturers who delighted in breaking spirits. Others were quieter, obeying orders without showing emotion, as if they too were trapped in a system larger than themselves. Yet, no matter their character, all were bound to the palace, their lives dedicated to ensuring the harem remained silent. The mistress of the harem, however, was more dangerous than any guard. She understood the girls' emotions, their hopes, their fears. She used kindness as a weapon, offering warmth one day and cruelty the next, teaching them that safety could only be found in obedience. In her hands, the forbidden rooms were not just prisons, they were classrooms of submission. The outside world believed the sultan ruled the empire, but inside the harem, it was these enforcers who held power over life and death. And as the empire grew stronger, so did their control. Behind every jeweled veil and golden chamber was the hidden truth. Silence was not natural, it was enforced, carved into the girls by those who watched from the shadows. Though the eunuchs and mistresses ruled the daily life of the harem, every action within its walls existed in the shadow of one man. The sultan, his presence was everywhere, though the girls rarely saw him. Foremost, he was not a man, but a legend, a figure whose approval could lift them from silence into luxury, or whose rejection could bury them forever in the forbidden rooms. The sultan's desires dictated everything. The way the girls were trained, the songs they learned, even the scents of their perfumes. All were carefully chosen to please his taste. A girl who caught his attention might rise overnight from nameless slave to favored concubine, dressed in silks and showered with jewels. But the road to his chambers was paved with fear. To be chosen was an honor, but it was also a test of survival. For many girls, the first encounter with the sultan was overwhelming. It spent weeks, even months, being reshaped into shadows of perfection. Now they were expected to embody grace, beauty, and obedience, with no room for error. A stumble, a wrong word, even a trace of fear could mean banishment back to the forbidden rooms. Yet the sultan's role was not only personal, but deeply political. His favorites became more than companions. He could be mothers to his children, players in palace politics, and rivals to each other. A concubine who bore a prince might rise to extraordinary power, even challenging the influence of the valid sultan, the sultan's own mother. Behind the silks and jewels lay vicious rivalries, all born from the fact that the sultan's attention was a prize worth everything. But for every girl who rose, dozens remained forgotten. Most never saw the sultan at all. They were trained endlessly, prepared for a meeting that never came. Instead, they became servants to more powerful concubines, or vanished into the forbidden rooms when they failed to meet expectations. Their lives were sacrifices, their silence the cost of maintaining the palace's glittering illusion. The sultan himself rarely acknowledged the suffering that built his harem. To him, the system was tradition, inherited from centuries of empire. The forbidden rooms were not spoken of, but their function was clear: to break the girls until they could be molded into whatever the throne required. Whether companions, servants, or pawns in political games, their worth was measured only by their usefulness to him. and so the shadow of the sultan stretched through every corridor of the harem. It was felt in the fear of the eunuchs, in the cruelty of the mistresses, and in the broken silence of the girls. To the world outside, he was the supreme ruler of an empire. But to the women inside, he was both God and executioner, unseen yet inescapable. Life in the harem was not only about survival under the eunuchs and mistresses. Once the girls left the forbidden rooms and entered the larger quarters, a new struggle began. A battle fought not with swords, but with whispers, smiles, and betrayals. It was here that rivalries turned the harem into a silent battlefield. The harem was built like a world within a world. At its top stood the valid sultan, the sultan's mother, the most powerful woman in the empire. Beneath her were the favored concubines, women who had risen high enough to share the sultan's bed and bear his children. These women lived in luxury, attended by servants and draped in silks. But their power was fragile. A single mistake, a single rival winning the sultan's attention, could cast them back into obscurity. For the ordinary girls, survival meant attaching themselves to one of these powerful figures. They became attendants, spies, and companions, hoping their loyalty would protect them from punishment. But loyalty was rarely permanent. The harem thrived on suspicion. A careless word could be reported to the mistresses. A small kindness could be twisted into evidence of disobedience. No one was safe. Competition grew fiercest when it came to bearing the sultan's sons. A concubine who gave birth to a prince secured her place in history. She could one day become the Haseki Sultan, the sultan's chief consort, wielding influence not only in the palace but across the empire. For this reason, women plotted constantly. Some whispered charms into the sultan's ear, others poisoned rivals' food, and still others bribed eunuchs for information. The girls caught in this web faced impossible choices. Refusing to play the game meant fading into servitude, invisible and forgotten. But joining the game meant betrayal, perhaps even betraying friends who had endured the forbidden rooms alongside them. Trust was rare, and friendships often ended in tragedy. History records stories of poisonings, stranglings, and mysterious deaths inside the harem. A favored concubine might vanish overnight, her absence explained away as illness. Sometimes the truth leaked into whispers. She had been outmaneuvered by a rival, or silenced by the eunuchs under secret orders. The harem's silence was deadly, and it hid a world where power was everything. To outsiders, the harem looked like paradise, a palace of silk curtains and golden halls filled with music and beauty. But to the women within, it was a battleground. Every smile hid suspicion, every gift carried a hidden cost. And at the heart of it all stood the forbidden rooms, the place where the silent wars began. For once a girl had been broken there, she learned the rule that governed the rest of her life. Survival was never about truth, but about silence. While some concubines rose to power and shaped the empire's politics, most of the girls never left the shadows of the forbidden rooms. Their stories, unlike those of the favorites or the Haseki Sultan, were never recorded in chronicles or songs. They were the invisible foundation of the harem, the forgotten ones whose lives were consumed in silence. Many of these girls served as attendants. They dressed the favorites, prepared their baths, carried messages, and cleaned the chambers. Their days were filled with endless tasks, their nights spent in narrow, crowded dormitories. Though they lived inside a palace of marble and gold, their own world was dark and cramped. The jewels and silks they touched were not theirs, only reminders of a life they would never have. Others remained trapped in the forbidden rooms for years, used for training new arrivals, or punished endlessly for mistakes long past. They became living warnings to the newcomers, reminders of what awaited those who resisted. Their faces aged in silence, their eyes empty, their spirits already buried long before their bodies were. Some were given away as gifts. Ambassadors, generals, and loyal officials might receive concubines from the palace as signs of the sultan's favor. To the empire, it was politics. To the girls, it was another form of slavery, exchanging one prison for another. Few ever saw freedom. The most tragic fate was reserved for those who broke completely. If a girl resisted too much, if she clung too tightly to her past, she often disappeared. The palace kept no record of their names. Rumors whispered of bodies buried in secret, of girls drowned in the Bosphorus at night, their silks weighed down with stones. The forbidden rooms erased them not only from life but from memory, and yet their silence shaped the empire. For every favorite who bore a prince, there were hundreds of forgotten girls who kept the harem running. They cooked the meals, washed the garments, lit the lamps, and bowed in obedience. Without them, the palace would have crumbled. But history rarely honors the invisible. Occasionally, a fragment of their suffering reached the outside world. European travelers, forbidden from entering the harem, sometimes heard whispers from servants or captured glimpses of pale, frightened faces at barred windows. They recorded rumors of girls weeping behind golden walls, of screams echoing from chambers no one spoke of. But these fragments were dismissed as exaggerations or buried by the empire's carefully crafted image of paradise. The forbidden rooms consumed lives silently, leaving behind no monuments, no graves, no songs. Only the faint echo of footsteps on cold stone, and the memory of girls who lived and died as shadows. They were the ones who never rose, never escaped, never even had their names remembered. They were the cost of the empire's illusion. For centuries, the Ottoman court worked tirelessly to protect the image of the harem. To the outside world, it was painted as a paradise of beauty and refinement, a place where the sultan was entertained by women of unmatched grace. The empire wanted ambassadors, traders, and visiting nobles to see luxury, not suffering. But no illusion lasts forever. Whispers of the truth began to leak beyond the palace walls. Foreign travelers who came to Istanbul often wrote with curiosity about the harem. But since men were forbidden entry, their accounts relied on rumors and fragments. Some described the harem as a place of wonder, filled with silks, perfumes, and laughter. Others hinted at darker tales. Screams heard through the night, women who vanished without explanation, and eunuchs who patrolled with merciless authority. In Europe, fascination with the harem grew into obsession. Artists painted exotic scenes of reclining concubines, musicians composed songs about hidden beauties, and writers published tales of forbidden love. But the truth was far from these fantasies. What the world saw as romance was, in reality, a system built on control, silence, and fear. Inside the empire itself, unease began to grow. The cost of maintaining the harem was enormous, draining wealth into the upkeep of hundreds of women, eunuchs, and servants. More than that, the politics of the harem began to spill into the empire's rule. Powerful concubines and the valid sultan influenced decisions of state, sometimes even controlling the throne through their sons. The Sultanate of Women, as historians would later call it, revealed just how far the influence of the harem reached. But along with this influence came danger. Poisonings, assassinations, and rivalries shook the palace. Each scandal chipped away at the illusion of harmony. Some officials began to question whether the harem was a treasure of the empire or its curse. They whispered that too many rulers had been distracted by the pleasures of the harem, neglecting their armies and their people. Still, the forbidden rooms remained hidden. Even when cracks appeared in the empire's power, the suffering inside those walls was rarely exposed. The silence of the girls ensured it. Even if an ambassador heard a rumor, even if a servant whispered the truth, no one outside could ever fully know the depth of what happened behind the locked doors. And so the illusion endured, both protected and poisoned by secrecy. The world continued to paint the harem as paradise, while the empire continued to deny its darkness. Yet beneath the silks and perfumes, the cracks widened. And as the centuries turned, the forbidden rooms of Topkapi carried a shadow that grew too heavy to be ignored. Today, the halls of Topkapi Palace stand quiet. Tourists walk through its courtyards, marveling at the golden domes, tiled walls, and glittering chambers. Guides speak of the sultans, their conquests, and the grandeur of the Ottoman Empire. They describe the harem as a place of culture and beauty, a world of refinement hidden from ordinary eyes. But few mention the forbidden rooms, and fewer still speak of the girls who were broken within them. The official histories of the empire remain polished, written by men who glorified the sultan's power and ignored the suffering that built it, concubines who rose to fame, the mothers of princes, favorites who shaped politics, are remembered in chronicles and legends. But the forgotten ones, the hundreds who never escaped the shadows, remain nameless. Their silence is their only monument. And yet the truth lingers in whispers. In the diaries of foreign visitors who caught fleeting glimpses, in the quiet rumors of servants, and in the scars left on the palace itself, historians piecing together the fragments know that the harem was never just paradise. It was also a prison, a system of control where girls were stripped of identity and molded into shadows. The forbidden rooms, though rarely mentioned, revealed the darkest heart of that system. The legacy of silence is powerful. By never speaking of what happened, the empire erased its victims from memory. But silence also leaves questions that refuse to fade. How many lives were lost in those chambers? How many dreams were crushed before they began? How many voices were buried in the walls of Topkapi? Walking through the palace today, it is easy to be distracted by beauty, the jeweled ceilings, the polished marble, the fountains that still flow. But if one listens closely, the silence feels heavier than stone. The forbidden rooms may no longer hold captives, but their legacy remains. They remind us that behind every glittering empire lies a shadow, that power often hides its cruelty behind veils of beauty. The harem was not only a place of luxury, it was also a machine of silence, built on broken lives. And so, the story of the forbidden rooms is not just history, it is a warning. A reminder that whenever suffering is hidden behind closed doors, whenever voices are silenced in the name of power, the truth does not disappear. It waits in silence to be told.